came from not only a poor house, but a bad house in that it was quarrelsome.
Mm-hmm.
Not only was there not enough money, but there was quarreling all the time. And my father was a good guy, but an absentee. Just never there.
He was just always on the road selling? He was always on the road?
Well, he wasn't there. Period.
Period? So even when he was home, he wasn't there?
And then he died young.
Mm-hmm.
My mother was left with 4 children, and my grandmother, his mother.
So your father, did he drink? Was he a gambler? Where was he?
My father
Mm-hmm.
was a gambler, womanizer.
Mm-hmm.
He was handsome.
So he was a deadbeat dad. That's what they call it these days.
Well, I don't know if sometime I must have told you the story that my grandmother told us about our family name, you know.
Well, tell me now.
Oh, come on. I told you.
Maybe
know.
I haven't heard it before.
Our family name was Tor Rod Tour. That you know.
Yes.
So when we were children, we always asked my grandmother, what kind of name is that? She said, and she started to tell us. And she said that her father-in-law had that name. That was the name of her father-in-law, naturally. And that he told her that she's marrying into royalty.
Even though he was
that,
poor?
Eh?
Even though he was poor?
Yeah, that was Brian.
Even though he was poor?
I talked to him.
Yeah.
He said you have to stay here for your
No,
own good.
in Russia, they were not necessarily poor.
You can't go home like this.
My father's father, my father's grandfather actually, had in Russia a horse stable.
Get your fluids back. So you must stay here.
And that was very good, and he made a nice living. But, as you know, this part of history is when
Pogroms.
yeah,
This is the
pogroms.
1850s?
And the first thing they would steal would be the horses, because if a Cossack doesn't have a horse, he can't get in the army. So, anyway, let's get to the story. So, he told her that she is marrying into royalty, and she should recognize that. And he said he was happy to have her, but she should recognize that because, and this is what he told her, that they lived before in a very warm country.
This bowel problem is cleared up.
And
Where do you think
They-
you were, Mother? Where are you?
his forefathers lived in a very warm country. And then the pogroms came in that country,
Yeah,
and that country was a bigger country,
Toronto, Canada.
and the other country was a smaller country, but the pogroms followed them.
General.
And the reason they are royalty is because when the pogroms came
Hospital.
in the first country, the Jews were allowed to change their name if they married in the royal family. The Jewish forefather was a doctor in the palace. That's what the story is.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the name. My grandmother told us this story. You know, my grandmother spoke Yiddish. We didn't talk Yiddish, but we could understand her.
She spoke French
That
or
was-
English
eh?
too? Did she also speak French?
No,
English?
grandmother.
Just Yiddish?
Well, you know. Anyway,
What was her name? What was her name? Your
There
grandmother.
it is.
Sarah.
Sarah.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
Anyway,
No, just a minute, Mother.
so that was the story, and when we were children, teenage, whatever, didn't pay much attention to it. Story, a bubble mites, like you know what that is. Then I used to read a lot, and I still do, Francie. And I started to read different things, and started to read about the Inquisition and so on and so forth. And of course, the story matched what I was reading.
Get rid of your problem.
But here is the sort of clincher. Okay.
To help you get rid of your diarrhea.
One time, you know, my sister lived in Atlantic City in New York State.
Bella?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to visit her, and on the way back, you have to go through New York. So I was in Idlewild. Oh, that's Kennedy, I think. Okay, yeah. I was in Idlewild, and the planes were stuck, and they couldn't go. So I had to be all night and wait for the plane.
That should help.
And there was a young man sitting there, and he only spoke French,
Mm-hmm.
and he was having,
Doesn't have to go in a fridge.
you know, so as soon as I heard his accent, I knew that he was French. And we started to talk. It was a whole night long, you know. And in between talking and everything, I told him this story.
Bellyache too.
And he said that he was in medicine in
Until
Quebec
they
City.
discharge you, which will probably
He
be
said
Wednesday.
his hobby is gerontology.
What's gerontology?
Yeah,
What's gerontology?
gerontology, family studies,
Okay.
Pardon?
and so that name, Torontour, he said that in his studies, if you have the Toro in your name, it comes from royalty. So that's the story.
Okay.
Okay?
It's okay.
Now,
I'm fine.
years later, I read more and more things. And eventually I wrote one particular book, which is called Rachel.
It's a hospital.
And it was written by a professor here in Toronto, as a matter of fact. And Rahel was a girl that lived in Spain during the Moorish Inquisition, the Moorish invasion,
Mm-hmm.
and the Inquisition, and so much of it matched this. So, you want to believe you come from royalty? Please. And also, the other thing, my great-grandfather, I guess, told my grandmother, and she told his son, her husband, he must never change the name. Never change the name.
Mm-hmm.
And I have an uncle
Continues with your stomach, you'd be
that
right
is a
back
brother
where
to
you
my
were.
father,
And you emerge.
and he spells it T-A-R,
Now, they can fix you
and he spelled it T-O-R, okay?
this weekend.
Well,
Then you'll be fine.
in Italy,
But if you
there
go
is a
home,
town called Taranto,
this continues, I have to bring you
and
back.
in another book I
Because
read,
can't drink enough
it
to
said
compensate for the
that this
liquid
town
you're using.
imported
You'd be right back in your
Jews
merge. You don't wanna do
to
that, do you?
Italy because they were silk
Stay here.
merchants.
Let them fix your
Mhm.
stomach.
And this town is famous for its silk export. And it's called Taranto. Auntie Bella and I were in Italy together. We found the town on the map, and we had every intention of going there to see if there was anything. But unfortunately, the train went on strike, and there were fights between the militia and the train people, and you couldn't
I'm fine.
we couldn't go. But that's the story.
So, but why would, if you had lived in Taranto, Italy, and gotten the name there, what would get you from there to Russia?
Oh, and you have to understand that, of course, the Jews lived in the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Italy and Israel. That that whole Israel's not Iberian, but that's in that whole area. When they pushed them, a lot of them went north.
So during the Spanish Inquisition, they would have left the Mediterranean
well,
and gone
according to
north?
the story, they went to Portugal. See, but I don't know what. I'm just repeating the story.
Right.
Okay, but in any case, the history tells you that that the Jews were pushed. They weren't pushed. They fled north.
Right.
And then they fled east. That's how they ended up in Russia. The other thing, which is not necessarily factual, but the Jews like in Spain and in Portugal, that area there, are the Jewish Sephardic Jews. You know this.
Mm-hmm.
Between the Sephardic and the Ashkenazis, the European, and they're Sephardic. No?
Not bad. So we might be Russian royalty.
I mean, I like it's a story. I can't prove it, and I don't particularly care. But I think it's interesting that I was able to learn from so many books, but the thing that kind of stuck with me is what that guy said in the airport. I mean, that's a kind of a coincidence. And Minsk, oh God, Minsk is such a Polish. There's billions and billions of Minces. Rena once gave that book, that all about the minces in Polish minces.
Let me check that out. Well, personally, I think it's enough to be proud of to be from poor Jews from Montreal. I think that's good.
Well, but
I think there's a lot of good tradition there.
see, you're Canadian born.
Mm-hmm.
We have never known serious anti-Semitism. When I was a child, there were lots of things, but serious, life-threatening anti-Semitism.
No.
So
Very windy.
you grow up not hating,
That's a good thing.
See?
That's a very good thing.
See? I mean, but some of the people, one of the people that was at the party is a Holocaust survivor.
Really?
And she's a big sort of lady.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to remember her. Good friend of mine. And she was in Auschwitz. And she met her husband there. And they survived. And they must have gone to 11 different countries trying to survive. And they, without a penny, built up a fortune. She has the most gorgeous home. She's a lady, though. She doesn't, it's a home. She has an apartment building and that's for me, probably. No, it could be for somebody else.
Mark Mince's right. Certainly, Mask is calling. No, it's Corey. Corey Mintz. Yes, I'm Henry. Yes. I'm just filling in for Mrs. Mintz handling her calls. A little while ago. Certainly, and does she have your number? Excellent. I will pass on the message. Good Shabbos. That was your son.
My little boy.